Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we have a special guest, Fairuz Abdullah, Associate Director of Public Interest Programs and Judicial Clerkships in the Office of Career and Professional Development in San Francisco at UC Hastings. And she's here to talk about one of my favorite topics, getting a clerkship. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, that's me, and typically I'm with my co-host Lee Burgess. Together, we're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience, so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Careers site. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach us via our contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we have a special guest, Fairuz Abdullah, Associate Director of Public Interest Programs and Judicial Clerkships in the Office of Career and Professional Development in UC Hastings. She's here to talk about one of my favorite topics, getting a clerkship. As some of you might know, the clerkship process, at least for federal clerkships, has changed quite a lot in recent years, and Fairuz has just returned from the NALP conference with some really useful information. So I'm excited to hear what she has to share on this topic. First off, Fairuz, how much have things really changed? Like, is the clerkship hiring plan dead? How do things work now if you want a federal clerkship?
Well, it's definitely not what it used to be.
Now, I remember it was like just, in fact, if you look at my posts, those are some of the first posts that I published on the Girls Guide site were about getting a clerkship. And it was this crazy thing where like one day in September, like everyone applied and like judges could only schedule interviews like at a certain date, like a week later, and everybody did their interviews on the same day. And I remember going to interviews in the Southern District of New York, and people were interviewing at like 6 a.m, and like, I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, it used to be the day after Labor Day.
Yeah.
Of your 3L year.
Yeah, it was like everything happened.
Yeah, it all happened.
People were like waiting by the phone, like everyone was waiting by the phone at the same time when your phones just start ringing. And like I remember being in Fed courts and like people's phones started ringing.
Yeah, it's completely changed. It started changing because a lot of judges were hiring outside the timeline.
Right. So what was the whole point of the plan anyway? Like why was this even implemented?
Well, I think it was just to have some order and fairness to the process.
Right. Because what was happening before is almost kind of what it sounds like is happening now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think a lot of that has changed. I think judges just started hiring earlier and earlier, not waiting until people were in the third year.
Yeah, like people started basically breaking the rules.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic because they're judges.
Yes. And so, yeah, you would think that they would be like, well, I wanna stick with something that makes sense and has some order to it. But I think it just became this trying to get the best candidate for their chambers and competing with their other judges. And so that's sort of what happened.
Like it's competitive for applicants, but it's also competitive for judges, like fighting over who the best applicants.
And so they started moving it earlier and earlier, and they changed it a year or two ago to the middle of your 2L year. And now they've moved it even earlier. So the plan doesn't really apply for anyone unless they're a rising 2L. The earliest that they can apply is July 1st.
Oh, okay. So people who are listening to this who have just finished their first year of classes and are thinking maybe off in some distant future they want to get a clerkship, they actually need to be thinking about this right now.
Yes. Yes, that is true.
So, I mean, if I am a rising 2L, do I need to be thinking about this summer? I mean, is this something I can put off? Like, or do I have to apply right now, or it's all never going to happen? Like, who needs to be worrying about this?
It all really depends on a couple of different factors. Where are you in your class rank? Where are you in terms of grades? Are you at the top of your class? If you're like the top 10 people in your class, yes, you should definitely be applying. Okay. If you're at a highly ranked school, yes, you should definitely be applying. Okay. If you are not quite at the top, maybe top 10%, top 20%, and you feel like you're on the upward swing, you might want to wait until you have another semester of grades under your belt before you apply.
Okay. So basically, if I'm like an absolute superstar and I'm sort of like maybe almost guaranteed I'm going to get a clerkship, I should be worrying about this.
Yes, definitely.
But otherwise, it sounds like maybe there's more time to sort of get my stuff together.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, you still want to get your stuff together. But in terms of being strategic about the more bang for your buck, there's basically a spike of positions getting posted now in January, December, January. And once that correlates with when grades come out after your 2L grades.
So I'd
and
have like
there's
3 semesters of grades at that point.
Yes,
I'd be applying in sort of
yes.
January of my second year.
Yeah, so there's a lot of hiring that's going around in the January, March, April timeframe.
Okay. And just to be clear, I mean, best case scenario, we're talking about a job that you get straight out of school, but I think a lot of judges are hiring even further out than that, right?
Yes, that's really interesting. You can get a clerkship 1-2 years out is pretty much the norm. At the NALP conference, I ran into a recruiter who came up to me and said, I don't really know what's happening, but one person who's starting in my class this year just told me he has a clerkship lined up 3 years from now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like people are sort of hiring maybe even further in advance. I mean, I think that's been a trend for a while.
Yes.
Then, it used to be at some point it was like always people straight out of school, and then it started being more like, oh, I want a year or so of work experience, or people were, I had friends who were getting offers for, clerkships 2 years out of school, or maybe they were doing 2 clerkships, and so they were starting, it seems like the whole thing's just become a lot more fluid.
It's definitely much more fluid. And I think that's to your advantage because if you're someone who's really dedicated and really wants this and you leave no stone unturned, the chances of you actually securing one are pretty good.
Right, because you were telling me earlier that it looks like applications are actually down.
Yes. So if you look at the Administrative Office of the Courts statistics, if you compare 2014, 2015 applicants are down. They don't really have the stats for 2016 yet because we're still in that year.
Yeah, so if somebody comes to you and they're like, I'm doing well, but I'm not like the absolute top of my class, like I really want to do this, your advice is basically cast a broad net, like keep applying, that
I
sort
always
of thing.
tell people, we're based here in San Francisco. Everybody wants to be in big cities. So if you're applying to like New York, LA, San Francisco, Boston, those are really high places where people want to be. They're going to get the most applicants. So there's a couple different conversations I have with students. Like one is, being geographically flexible. 2 is thinking about state court clerkships and then applying to federal clerkships. So I always talk to students about clerkship stacking. Also thinking about applying to non-traditional judges like magistrate judges.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So, people might be listening to this and they don't really have a whole lot of background. Like when we talk about clerkships, what are we even talking about here?
That's kind of, when you're thinking about where people tend to apply, there's trial courts and appellate courts, and they're both at the state and
Could I just
federal.
apply straight to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other podcast, whole other conversation.
Yeah, I don't think I have any background on that. I was a trial court clerk for a federal district court, which is a fantastic experience, and I really enjoyed it. But I definitely, although apparently my judge has become sort of a feeder type.
Oh.
He's had several people recently end up on the Supreme Court clerking.
That's kind of fantastic.
Yeah, if you really want to feel like an underachiever, just find out your judge has, his former clerks on the Supreme Court, and you're not one of them and didn't even think about applying.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a special place to be, I guess.
Yeah.
The way that it works is federal courts are sort of the gold standard. That's what everybody wants.
Right.
And the trial courts are the district courts where a lot of people sort of end up. There's 94 federal district courts. People tend to really want the circuit courts,
Yeah, it's funny because I had no interest in doing that really, and I think I had a lot of conversations with professors at my school that were like, "Oh, you have a really good shot at this. You have to be applying to these," and I was just like, "I actually don't want to do that. Like, I would rather. I wanted to be a litigator, a trial lawyer, and so for me, the thought of sitting through appellate hearings and writing the same cases that we read in law school, I was like, oh, that sounds so boring. But I had to really fight people on that. They were not necessarily happy about the idea that, I would not achieve my full potential because I was only doing trial court clerkship.
Yeah. Well, the thing is now it's very difficult for you to even get a circuit court clerkship out of school.
Yeah.
Many courts want to see either a district court clerkship or actually work experience if you're coming from a law firm or government agency.
Which makes sense.
And then applying to that. Yeah, exactly. You've got more work experience, more maturity, more experience.
Yeah, and more I think it's almost an expectation if you want an appellate clerkship, you're going to have to do a trial court.
Yes, definitely. And in the trial court level, you're doing a lot of fact-finding, a lot of motion practice, discovery, disputes, settlement conferences, that type of thing.
Yeah.
At the appellate court, you're going to be doing a lot of researching law and fact in an appeal. You might help the judge actually draft the appeal.
Yeah, it's more like White Shoe.
Exactly.
It's more ivory tower.
It's
so for me,
very ivory tower.
I wanted to be like in the trenches. And, I mean, I thought that's why I loved my clerkship. It was so interesting. We had like trials, we had hearings. It was like the stuff that, you never even looked at before. Like no one's ever given you like, discovery disputes or anything. And that's like the stuff that you're doing. Exactly. And I was like, this is what I will do every day. Like,
exactly.
But I understand the appeal of like making new law and all that.
Oh yeah, I mean your published opinions that the lower courts have to follow. It's pretty prestigious.
Yeah, it's very prestigious.
But if that's something you want, there's no reason you can't, stack a clerkship. Start at a district court, go to a court of appeals, or go into the workforce and then jump to the court of appeals. Those are all different options available to you.
And so do the state courts, do they have the same options, or is it?
State courts are all over the map. Yeah. So if you look at California where we are, you've got the Superior Court, the Appellate Court, the Supreme Court. Our appeals court does not hire term clerks.
Right, they do like career clerks, right?
Yes, they do staff attorneys that are there for, they start and they usually stay there for a long time because they're really happy in their jobs.
Yeah,
our Supreme Court, our Supreme Court does take on term clerks, but they're not called that. They're called annuals.
Oh, interesting.
And they'll take them in their criminal and their civil division, but it's not. It's not a sure bet.
Right.
It's one of those things where it may open up, it may not.
Yeah.
There are rumors in California that both the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals are actually thinking about doing term clerks and moving to that model, but it's not publicly sort of available
yeah, I knew
information.
people who someone clerked in the Supreme Court of Alaska. That was a popular option.
Yes.
But I guess the takeaway message here is if you think you want to do a state court, you really need to investigate this, right?
Yeah, there's lots of really great options to be able to investigate it. I mean, you can look at the National Center for State Courts, which is fantastic. If your school applies to the Vermont Law School State Court Clerkship Guide, that's fantastic. Okay. It's a paid subscription by your school, and you can basically look at a
school
timeline.
Should probably have.
Yes, well, let's hope your school has that because it's
if not, maybe send them this podcast and suggest that they
exactly. Yeah, that's a good option. And it's great because it tells you not only the court address, but the timelines and what things look like. Now, what I usually tell students is no matter what you see online, definitely check the court website because things are changing. A lot of state courts are noticing this trend in federal clerkships and getting students getting hired earlier. So they're sort of jumping on the bandwagon and they're moving their timelines up earlier.
Right.
So you have to be really cautious about what you see in writing and then actually going to the court website or even calling the court. Call the HR department. Call the person who's in charge of attorney staff hiring. Yeah, and just say, I'm interested in this opportunity. Can you give me some information?
And most schools also have clerkship offices that people should be talking to, right?
Definitely. Talk to anyone in your career office who does clerkship counseling because we have all the most up-to-date information and we're here to help you and we want you to get clerkships.
Right. So your incentive is to help people get what they want, which is great.
Yeah, and analyze your options.
Yeah, this is a good example where your incentives and your school's incentives are exactly aligned. Unless they really want you to do an appellate clerkship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there are other sort of federal options. Can you clerk for a magistrate judge or things like that?
So what people don't realize what a magistrate is. The term I use with my students is they're the workhorse of the district court.
Yeah, they do all the real work.
Yeah. They're appointed for 8-year terms by district court judges, and they can hear anything except criminal trials. And so even if you're interested in criminal law, you're going to litigate all the way up to trial. It's a fantastic opportunity, especially if you're here in the Northern District, Southern District, Eastern District. They're very well respected, and students have a fantastic experience with them.
Yeah, and I think, my advice to people is think about what you want. If you want to get your hands dirty, a magistrate could be, sure, it's not as prestigious as doing a court of appeals, but if you want to be that scrappy litigator who knows how things work, maybe you're better off doing that for your long-term career.
And it's great, especially a lot of times students don't think about if they're public interest or government oriented. I don't see enough of those students applying.
Interesting.
And I think that's a travesty.
Yeah.
Because that's going to help you move through the process of getting and securing a long-term government job, but it's also going to really prepare you for litigating, which is you're going to do a lot of that in in government and public interest.
Yeah, one thing people might not be aware of that probably negates the point you just made is if you are going to think you're going to be working at a firm, they tend to give out very nice clerkship bonuses.
Oh, yes. Yes, the bonuses.
Last time I checked, they were, $50,000 or something on average?
Well, I think they've gone up.
Have they gone up? Yeah, I haven't looked for a while. I heard that they were going up. So if you do think that big law is in your path, which let's face it, if you can get a Court of Appeals clerkship, it probably could be if you want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the downsides for some people about clerking is obviously it doesn't pay as well as a firm job, but they do sort of make it up to you on the back end. You get a year of credit for your class, and then you also get a nice bonus, essentially a hiring bonus when you start, so you can take your trip to, wherever after your bar trip. You want to take a little break while you do that?
Yeah, you know what? I also think that when it comes to federal salaries, they're probably a little bit better than people seem to think.
Yeah. Tell us.
Yeah, so I think when you start right out of school, your annual base salary right now is about $51,000, but it depends. There's a cost of living adjustment.
Right.
So if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, it could be the range is 70 to 91,
which is not really that bad.
Yeah, and if you're LA Long Beach, it's 66 to 85.
Yeah,
so.
And the other thing is, if you have work experience, even a year of work experience, that can go up a lot. So
so
there can be an advantage to sort of postponing your clerkship 1 year, getting some experience under your belt, and then making a lot more money.
Exactly, because the range then bumps up to 84, anywhere from 84,000 to 103.
Hello, sign me up. Can I go clerk again? Yeah. That was fun. And then you get the bonus, I think, when you get back. So.
Yes, exactly.
It can actually work out financially not as badly of a decision, as well as, the prestige for your career and, your inherent love of serving the judiciary and learning something. But
I've never met a clerk who didn't love
it was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally you hear stories about a terrible judge, but
it's far and few between.
Yeah, I would say on average, most people say it's probably the best legal experience they've ever had, because it's amazing. I mean, you're there, you're helping, someone who's really competent and doing important stuff. And, for me, you really see what happens in a court. I mean, it's the whole range of stuff. We had a criminal trial that was marijuana, and then we had another thing where it was a sexual harassment and retaliation case, and then you get sentencing for federal drug crimes, and you see these kids sitting in court getting these huge mandatory minimum sentences, and I think it really can change the way you view things.
Definitely. And it also makes sense to do a little investigation on the judge you're applying to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's lots of ways. I mean, Judgepedia, believe it or not, is a great it's the Wikipedia of judges.
Interesting.
Leadership Library is a really great directory. We can do a little background.
We can put all these in the show notes.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of schools have them. I know our Law Review, if you were on Law Review, they actually had sort of a bank of materials on judges. I mean, one thing, if people do have interviews, they can actually reach out to people, right? They can reach out to alums. I've had people call me saying, I'm interviewing with your judge. Do you have any tips? I did that and got some great tips on what he was likely to ask.
Key. Students do not use that resource enough. Every school is very proud of their alumni clerks, and they have a list. Yeah. Somewhere out there, someone has
it, right?
Yes. And a lot of schools have judicial clerkship committees, and they're usually professors who really want you to get a clerkship. They're a great resource of information. Also, if people know your judges, professors know, they have relationships with judges you're applying to, the big thing now is judges want phone calls. They want to know. They're you should hire my student for this reason.
Yeah, I think I'm not saying you need that, but it certainly is not going to hurt. I mean, even or people that you work with over the summer, just asking around, do you have any friends who are judges? I mean, I definitely got one interview with someone I didn't work for based on that, because a partner at the law firm liked me, and he's oh my gosh, yes, I'll call my friend and tell him that he should hire you.
Yeah, the NALP conference had a whole panel discussion on networking to get a clerkship.
Yes, I mean, what are judges generally looking for here? I mean, you've mentioned phone calls, grades. I mean, are those kind of the big ones?
Well, once again, you can't really get into the head of a judge because it's all over the place what their focus is. But they do want strong writers. They want people with excellent analytical skills. They're looking for people who are going to be a good fit in their chambers. Chambers are small. You've got like 2 staff attorneys, a couple externs.
It's a disaster if people don't work out.
So it's kind of nice to know, like maybe they're going to be looking for people who have things that are they have in common. So on your resume,
the judge hired me because I had gone to architecture school, and he just has like a real interest in architecture. His former clerks laughed when I met them. They said, "Oh, we knew immediately when we saw your resume that if you would take the job, he was going to hire you because he wanted someone to talk to him about architecture."
Exactly.
Like you could not have predicted that.
Exactly. I had a student who got an interview with the judge because he taught little kids how to play soccer. He was like a soccer coach for young kids, and so was the judge. And he told him in the interview, "I don't think I would have called you had you not done this."
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I mean, I know one thing that I've always encouraged people to do is kind of put some stuff on their resume that kind of humanizes them.
Yes, for sure.
Which I think sometimes people think like, oh, this is so prestigious, it's very professional. Like I should just like, focus on like my grades and stuff. It's like, no,
you should have an interest section.
Yeah, like everybody's going to have good grades if they're applying to this. That's not going to differentiate you. Like you need something that somebody can be like, oh, that looks interesting. I'd like to talk to that person. Because I think they are looking for someone who's going to be, a hard worker, but also a good fit, like easy to get along with,
And some insight into your personality. I mean, once again, it's a small place. They want to kind of know who they're hiring.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And judges are sort of switching to behavioral interviewing questions now, too.
Interesting.
They're moving a little bit away from the traditional questions to kind of get a sense of how you work under pressure, how you're going to get along with your staff.
Luckily, I had a tip-off from someone who was like, basically like, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but since you took the initiative to call me, I'll pretty much tell you what he's going to ask you. And it was one of those, like, to put you under pressure questions. So I was like, well, I got this one. I know what's coming. But if you don't know that, and I think, too, I mean, it's one of those situations where if you have an interview, like, you absolutely need to be, like, very polite to everyone you meet. Like, this is not a time to be rude to the secretary.
No,
things like
not.
that. Like, everybody gets input in chambers.
Yeah. A couple of things that are also really important are your writing sample. So a lot of now students are applying earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
And so they're using writing samples that they're writing in the very early part of their career, and you're going to be, updating and changing things. So you want to make sure you have the strongest sample of writing possible. You want strong letters of recommendation.
Yeah, so how can people go about building like these relationships with professors, particularly if they're going to be applying just after 1 year?
You've got to go to their office hours. You've got to go to their office hours, bring a resume, bring your story. Why are you in law school? What's interesting about you? You have to kind of be your own marketer to the professor, and you need to continue on in this relationship. You need to keep them informed of where you're applying. You need to let them know when you have an interview, and just continue with this relationship is very important. You should probably also have one outside recommender, someone who's a non-professor who knows your work. You may have had a totally different career before law school.
Right.
It's perfectly fine if you were a preschool teacher to have the principal write a letter of recommendation because it says, what are you like as a worker, day in and day out, 9 to 5?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think about my letters of recommendation, and it was really all from stuff that I did my 2L year. So I think that does, I think it just makes it harder for 1Ls particularly to stand out. And, it might be one of those situations where if you apply or you don't, say you decide not to apply initially or you apply and you don't really get a lot of interest, it's not like you should just give up. You can develop better relationships basically through taking an extra class with someone, writing a paper with someone, like doing a clinic, being a TA or research assistant. I mean, I'm thinking if I'm a judge, a letter from someone who's like, this person has been working for me for the last 6 months, 4 months, a year. They're an excellent research assistant. I would highly recommend them to anyone. Is really going to carry a lot of weight.
Oh, definitely.
So I think it's, the message is probably don't give up if you don't if you don't like get, picked right out of the box. It doesn't mean your clerkship dreams are over, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely was the theme of the conference. Like, don't give up, just keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you've got to be kind of dedicated to. But I think if you are, potentially, people could even be in a better position than just like the craziness of that one like day or weekend and getting all these calls and like trying to schedule everything at once, which is nuts.
Well, people think I think they're a little bit scared because they think, it's so much work to put through an application together. But if you're, in school, you have people to help you. Once you get it down, then it's just, a matter of getting it out.
Yeah, and there is like this Oscar system, right? That a lot of, so what is that?
It's the online system of application review. It's only for federal clerkships. And I would say 2/3 of judges are on it.
Okay, so not all of them.
Not all of them are on it. And it's a great way. You can apply to 100 judges at a time. It's a great way to apply.
Judges apply to all of them, like all over the country.
But I usually tell students not to, put all their eggs in one basket. A lot of judges now, they can use specific drop-down menus in Oscar to select by school, by class rank. So if they just want to look at Harvard,
right,
and they don't want to look at your school, there's a way for them to only see what they want to see.
Right.
So it's probably
fine if they're not going to hire you anyway.
Exactly.
Save everybody the time, I guess.
So I usually tell students to be strategic and mail some of your applications. So if you look on Oscar, it will tell you if the judge says no mailed applications.
Right, like don't mail them.
Don't mail it. But if they're agnostic about it and they give you an option to mail it, I would say 25 to 30 of your top judges send them a paper application.
Yeah, I mean they're likely to at least look at it, or someone will look at it.
Well, someone will look at it. That's the key. Someone will look at it.
Yeah, I mean judges I think vary wildly in how they hire. I mean some of them outsource it completely to like their clerks and secretaries. Some of them do it all themselves. You just never know. As with many things with judges, just never know.
You just never know. Right.
They're appointed for life. They can pretty much do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But I mean I think they're all looking for someone who's going to be like helpful and easy to work with and dedicated. I mean, some of them are looking for people to work 40 hours a day. But if that is what you want, great. If not, you should know, ask around if you have an interview coming up about what you might be getting into. What about what if you want to do a judicial externship during school or during the summer? Does that make any difference here?
I think it does.
Yeah.
And I think it depends also. If your school isn't as highly ranked, maybe your grades aren't that well, an externship is really going to kind of put you out and get you noticed.
Yeah, so an externship basically is when you work for a judge either during the semester or during the summer, right?
For credit or no credit.
Yeah. So you would actually be kind of like a mini clerk almost.
You're getting exposed to it. You're doing substantive work. It's pretty great.
Yeah, and then I mean that potentially that judge may or may not be a recommender for you. They can, some of them will hire their own externs. Some of them won't. Again,
it's very rare that they will hire their own externs. It's very rare they'll write letters.
Yeah.
But sometimes the staff attorneys or the clerks are people you get exposed to, and they will many times write letters.
Yeah, and I think it's also, maybe the judge isn't going to pick up a phone, but he might sort of nudge his colleague and be like, oh, yeah,
Exactly. Or sometimes, they'll get a call from chambers.
Well, I would hope that they would get a
call.
call.
What was this person like?
I mean, if I'm thinking I'm hiring and someone's worked for a different judge, I'm probably going to make sure I talk to that person. Yeah. So even if they're not necessarily immediately reaching out on your behalf, they might be behind the scenes sort of working, which is why you need to do a great job as an extern.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I had one friend who got hired that way. But I know, my judge had an explicit policy that he would never hire his externs because he's like, it's pointless. You've already worked with me.
Yeah.
I'll help you get something else, but I'm not going to hire you again because that takes a slot away from someone else, and these are really limited, and it doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. That's definitely the thought process.
Yeah. So, but again, judges can do whatever they want. And, if you have friends who have clerked, you may as well talk to them. Do you like your judge? That sort of thing. I mean, a lot of the stuff goes on behind the scenes. I definitely have made or not made, referrals for people or have been consulted on, do I like or not like this person as a potential employee, and have given honest opinions on both sides of that.
Yeah. And usually sometimes there'll be someone at your school who's like the director of externships, and they place a lot of students in externships for credit, and they have a lot of intel on judges. So you might want to check with.
And I think it's also one of those things that people just like to do. I mean, anyone, any of our tutoring students who we've helped get externships, they're like, oh, this is the greatest experience ever. It's so interesting. I really love it. So I think it's something, particularly if you're interested in clerking, or maybe you're not even interested in clerking, but you want to have a little bit of that experience. I think it can be a really great way to sort of dip your toe in the pool.
Yeah.
So one question I forgot to ask earlier, are these U.S. clerkships only for U.S. citizens, residents, or is it possible that if I'm a student from another country, because I think my judge hired a Canadian.
Yes, you have to have legal status to work in the U.S.
All right, so basically if that's something you're interested in, you should probably look into it, because
definitely.
I think it's an area that's kind of in flux, but it might be possible. If not, you might have to go back to your home country. But all right, well, let me ask you one last thing. So if somebody's listening to this and they really want to clerk, what's your best advice on making that happen?
Slow and steady wins the race.
Okay, so just keep applying, keep plugging away at it, keep it open as an option, like keep improving.
Be geographically flexible, develop good relationships with professors. Strong letters of recommendation are key.
Yeah, so you can develop those relationships. It doesn't sound like everything has to happen based on just like your first 2 semesters of grades.
No. And tap into the alumni network. It's huge. It's meaningful. And
yeah, because more and more alumni are really applying for clerkships.
There's 43% of applicants out there right now, at least in 2015, were alums.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, basically, even after you graduate from law school, maybe you work at a firm for a little while, you decide it's not the path for you. That's a popular transition out option as you apply for a clerkship and then leave it a little vague about whether you're going to come back and then move on to the rest of your life.
Exactly. I counsel alums all the time. They're calling me up and saying, I want to make a switch or I want to try this.
Yeah. So, it's not like when you graduate, you lose all access to the resources of your school either, which I think people could remember.
Yeah. And definitely get on Oscar. Like someone like myself who's, a clerkship opportunity comes up for me, I contact my students who are on Oscar, my grads who are on Oscar.
Oh, that's awesome.
And send them those opportunities. So you want to, that's a really great way for people at the law school to know you're still actively looking.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing you can also do sometimes is like new judges are always going to be looking to hire. So like keep an eye out for when, those people finally get appointed.
Judicialnominations.org.
Yeah.
The minute someone gets appointed,
they're going to need clerks.
Yeah, they're going to need clerks. They don't even know they need clerks, but you're going to be there to tell them they need a clerk.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this is just like paying attention, like being on the ball, and if it's something you are really dedicated to, you probably have a pretty decent shot at it if you keep plugging away. All right, well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Fairuz, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. People can definitely write in with questions. We'll pass them your way. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Typically, we release new episodes on Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Allison, at lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck with your clerkship hunt.